So I'm here with Josh Newman, former State Senator Josh Newman. Now, you are a Fullerton resident, and now this is for your hometown newspaper.
Right, and I am a subscriber and loyal reader of
Loyal
the
reader,
Fullerton Observer.
okay, well,
yeah.
you know that we have a pretty good online presence, so we want to talk to you about something that you've spent a lot of time on. You were chair of the Education Committee, but it seems like education now is a bigger political issue than it was in the past. Tell us a little bit about what you've seen over the past few years that have made this rise to the top.
Well, I mean, there's sort of two dimensions to it. The one is what we're seeing too much of recently, Andy, and that's the extent to which the culture wars have seeped into the educational sphere. In districts like Placentia or Belinda, Chino Valley, at the board level, the conversations are almost exclusive about culture war issues, right, at the expense of both the students who are so directly harmed by those conversations, but I would argue more generally, quality of education. You know, every meeting that gets dominated by, that argument is another meeting where we don't have a more serious discussion about quality of education, access to resources, consistency of outcomes. And so those are things I think we need to refocus folks on.
And how do you do that? How do you get that refocus? Because years ago, anytime education was discussed politically, it was about the bond issue or something very low level. Now it's about everything. It's like there's no guidelines. So
right.
How do you get refocused on the really crucial issues in education?
So I think where we start is to reinvigorate this conversation about education as a public good, as a shared good that has all of us have a stake in, but that actually has made California, made America exactly what it is. And we often don't realize that part of the subtext of all these conversations is it's whittling away at the broader notion of the American public education ideal. And I think we got to get people sort of reconsidering that. And even if you don't have kids, you have a stake in the quality of education in your community. To the extent that people don't really realize that makes them, I think, more susceptible to these other hot button issues that are actually distractions from the bigger point.
Well, when you served in the state senate, you must have run into specific challenges to try to get focus. Is there anything you can remember that represents the biggest challenge of trying to get the legislature to focus on educational issues? Because we've never really fully funded education.
We haven't fully funded education, and yet we've sort of resorted to funding formulas like Prop 98, like the local control funding formula, to meet our minimum obligations. And so my observation is that to the extent that the system now does that almost on autopilot, it sort of relieves legislators, elected people, from their obligation to actually really be seriously committed to and responsible for the quality of education. So that has to happen. I think we have to force elected people at every level, but especially the state level, to be really serious about making good on the rhetoric. Everybody runs to, for office as they're, got champion of education. But in a state as massively, large and complex as California's, this is complicated stuff, and we got to make sure that we're really focused on these details.
Well, in that regard, though, you did write an op-ed that you said you're going to run for an office that should be eliminated. So when you tell us a little bit about that.
Not eliminated while I'm running.
No.
But I think, the argument is, we have the top educator elected position in California. It's called the Superintendent of Public Instruction. Sounds like something out of like the 50s. But over the last 20 years, the legislature and the governor have either reserved responsibilities for funding or created new entities for doing certain things. And so it's kind of, the SPI has a more limited role than I think people realize. But because there's an elected public education official in California, that creates, I think, too much space for the governor, the executive branch, and for legislators to kind of not do their fair share. And I think if you transition that SPI role to a Secretary of Education role, and the governor appointed that, one, you could have a very accomplished professional educator, who would be
more professionalized, rather
much
than
more savvy to all the complexities of these systems. But it would also align the responsibilities and political incentives for improving education, and cause the public to hold the governor and the legislature more responsible for their contributions. That's what we need, especially now where California continues to languish in the bottom quarter of states when it comes to achievement.
I appreciate your time. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.